What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Sports Card Madness, the podcast that focuses on sports cards, collectibles, the hobby, and everything else in between. I sat down with Tim Gallagher. He is literally the GOAT of autograph collecting. He has had over 25,000 items autographed in his life, either through the mail or in person. He's been doing this for 40 years. He's got stuff from MJ. He's got stuff from LeBron. Hope you guys enjoy.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ.
Kick is on the way, and it is good!
It's good! 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes!
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Sports Card Madness. I am here with Tim Gallagher, and in my opinion, I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but in my opinion, Tim is the GOAT of autograph collecting. I have never run into somebody with more autographs and more years doing it in my entire time in the hobby. It's incredible. So you guys are going to love to hear what he has to say. He's got a lot of cool stories. So Tim, I figured you could introduce yourself and tell us what you're up to and maybe how you got started in all this.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Well, thanks for having me on. And I've enjoyed listening to some of your podcasts, watching some of them. The Adrian Dantley one brought back some memories of seeing him play in college at Notre Dame. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, which will be part of my collecting background. But when teams would come in to play Dayton, especially with All-Americans like Adrian Dantley, my buddies and I were right there, getting the stuff signed. And I remember getting Dantley. Actually, the first time was his freshman year when they were on that team that broke UCLA's winning streak. Although they came into Dayton later that season and Dayton beat them in one of the monumental games in Dayton history, which is a whole nother story. But although in those days there really wasn't much to get of a guy, so I got him on an index card at the time.
Right.
And then by the time he rolled around as a senior, he was on a couple Sporting News covers and got him signed there. But yeah,
Very
I
cool.
remember watching AD in Notre Dame, and so cool to see him as a guest for you. But yeah, I think your intro is pretty high standards to live up to. I don't know, we'll get into what I do now as a consignment director, but I'm humbled all the time about my collection. Now, I've been collecting since the late 1960s, basketball, baseball, football, initially for, let's say the first 10 years plus, and then kind of have gravitated toward basketball and focused solely on basketball now, but had a lot of great and fun collecting experiences. Kind of the short version of how it all got started, like my buddies, we grew up following sports and collecting cards, whatever was available, going to our local drugstore and buying the packs that were on the shelf and, following sports. But I was fortunate that I had a cousin, Bill Baker, who since has passed away some years ago, but he was about 5 years older than me and really kind of showed me the ropes of how it all was done. So one summer, this must have been 1966, 1967. They lived in Chicago. So being cousins, we'd see each other in the summer and occasionally on holidays and so on. So he showed up one summer in Dayton, and we went down to Cincinnati for a Reds game, which I'd been to some games with my dad and maybe gotten a program signed and not anything sophisticated at all. And not really on any sort of a mission to collect things. But my cousin had baseball cards with him. He had a manila folder with some Sports Illustrated tear-outs or Sport Magazine. Back in the day, Sport Magazine, some of those color photos were like works of art. He had some of those in his folder, index cards, and went down early before the game to the team hotel where players were kind of accessible in those days, before the game, get there early enough during batting practice down by the dugout, wait after the game by the player parking lot or the team bus. So, kind of showed me a whole world that I didn't know existed. And especially in those days, most players were pretty compliant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you had a few tough guys, Don Clendenin, Frank Robinson. There were some guys that weren't very, very nice about signing, but for the most part, most everyone was good. And then my cousin also showed me how to mail out for autographs, with a stamped self-addressed envelope. And, and I wasn't very sophisticated initially with that. Kind of a shout out to the U.S. Postal Service. So, and before zip codes, and obviously there was no internet or ways to get all this information, right? So, I think the first autograph I mailed to Paul Robinson, who was a running back on the Bengals, I probably addressed it, Paul Robinson, Cincinnati Bengals, Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't know if it was more sophisticated than that. I might have put Nippert Stadium where they played the Bengals inaugural season, but that wouldn't have been where their offices were or anything. But somehow, you know, 10 days later, this signed photo comes back in the mail, and
Like
um,
magic, right? It's like
like magic, and shared that with my buddies. And then we got more sophisticated in terms of mailing out and stamp self-addressed envelopes and all of that. So that really got things all off and running. That would have been in the late 1960s.
that's
And
crazy.
and uh, and I'd say that where basketball kind of jumped ahead of the pack, just was some fortunate timing. So growing up in Dayton in 1967, which I would have been a young kid, but Dayton made it all the way to the NCAA finals in basketball. They lost to UCLA. Coach Wooden, Kareem, as everyone knows him now, was then Lou Alcindor, was a sophomore. So that was all just getting rolling. Now UCLA had won a couple titles before that, but really the Wooden era that I think most people are familiar with, and with Kareem and the run that they were embarking on, was just getting started. But I saw what that did to the community of Dayton. Again, I was a kid, so I wasn't consciously processing all this, but kind of the spark that that provided to the whole community. And Dayton basketball was a pretty big thing already, but when that happened, the whole town, went crazy about it. And there were a couple players, a guy named Don May, who was my boyhood hero. He's on a number of Topps cards that you probably have some signed ones, but he was my hero. And would occasionally get lucky, and my dad would score tickets to a game. They played in an old, smaller field house then. Um, they eventually moved in to University of Dayton Arena, which is still heavily used today. More NCAA tournament games are played there than any other venue. They have the first four there. So obviously, growing up in that community of Dayton, it's basketball is a big deal.
Sure.
And so that Dayton team, Don May, the success of that team, we lived in a house that had a little hoop on the side. There was like a side paved part of the driveway that there really wasn't ever a car there, but there was a hoop against that side of the house. And so I started spending a lot more time out there dribbling the basketball, getting shots up, dreaming of future glory of basketball, and loving the game. So that really set me off on the basketball course in particular. But especially back in those days, my buddies and I, we were very seasonal, right? Baseball season, we focused on baseball, played pickup baseball, played on our little league teams. It was just, you kind of cycled with the seasons. That's a little different than the world we live in now, where even at a young age, kids are specializing and all of that. But
Yep.
we were kind of ahead of our time, I think, a few of my buddies and I, where we kind of locked in on basketball early, and really focused on that, both to try to be players as well as collecting.
Right. I think you're like 40 years ahead of me. So you were doing this way back in the day with the tall boys and everything. That's a quick follow-up question I had. What it seems like you weren't getting a lot of cards signed per se at first. It was like index cards and magazines. Was that kind of like, if you went to a stadium and wanted to get like, something signed by Jordan, were you showing up with like a magazine or a card or a shoe, or like what were you bringing at the time?
Well, yeah, well, we'll get to the Jordan era here, but yeah, initially it was just whatever was available, and those tall boys didn't come out till 1969. So I'd gone to some NBA games before that, and there were no basketball cards that even existed. I mean, I guess especially where I was, Cons Wieners, which is kind of an obscure
Right.
set, but some of the Cincinnati Royals, and those are really cool cards, but I wouldn't have known where to go. There weren't card shops, or, you know, I guess, occasionally you'd peer to the back of the Sporting News and see things about baseball cards for sale or things like that. But that was kind of a whole nother world. You kind of bought what was available.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the focus of the collection were sports cards, index cards, and magazine photos. Yeah, shoes or any other kinds of memorabilia were not really easy to transport, and we weren't really thinking on those terms
Yeah.
either. The index cards are obviously pretty basic, but not everyone was on a baseball card or basketball card or football card, um, and not everyone was featured in Sport or in Sports Illustrated either. So it was kind of a nice, easy, all-purpose thing to get. And I'm probably in a minority, but I've still love some of the signed index cards I got back in the day. And for a long, long time, even to this day, kind of like to have a player on an index card just as a kind of a foundation of the collection.
Right.
And
I know.
some of them end up pretty cool once they get slapped by PSA now, and you know,
Yep.
they present kind of nicely, especially in those days when players maybe were a little more conscious of giving a nice signature, right?
Right.
And had a little more, it was part of their brand or part of their style, maybe not even consciously, but now some things are so or it's just a scribble. It's hard to even classify it as an autograph sometimes in my mind.
I knew they do shorten up over time. Like Chris Mullen, for example, used to write his entire name. Now it's just like Chris. It's pretty crazy. So, let's get into that Jordan experience here. I personally want to know, how many times did you get something signed by Michael Jordan, and how on earth did you pull it off? And like, when did it happen?
Sure. Well, the first time I got Michael Jordan was through the mail his freshman year at North Carolina, which going back, so this would have been what, 1980, approximately, I guess, right? His freshman year, whatever year that
Mhm.
was, right? Um, so my buddies and I, uh, we're going to jump back in time a little bit here, but when the magazines would come out each year around this time of year, right? The college basketball preview issues will be coming out soon, right? Well, in those days, Street and Smiths, or there were some other more independent publications. We'd buy the magazine. We'd look at, here's the top, 50 college players, or here's the All-American, teams that are projected for this season. And we would divide those up and mail to them. And so I kind of doing that in the late 1960s, and with my buddies, and we'd put in 3 index cards. So if 2 of my buddies were kind of at my same level, had my same passion and appetite for collecting, so we kind of worked out a deal. Hey, we'll send 3 index cards. When the guy answers, I'll keep one. I'll give one to you, Jack. I'll give one to you, Vince. And then they would do the same thing. Now, occasionally a guy would personalize or maybe only sign one.
Yep.
Not usually, though. I mean, it usually worked out pretty well. But even the guy that maybe only signed one or personalized, well, we knew that was a sure thing that guy would answer. So then the others would just write to him and get him on our own. But we had some incredible coverage for many years doing that.
Right. It was
So
almost
my
like playing
first,
an index fund in the stock market, right? You're just kind of going for the top players, hoping it works out, and you happened to get Michael Jordan, which worked out
right.
great.
Trust me, I have a whole shoeboxes full of A to Z index cards of guys that didn't turn out to be Michael
Right.
Jordan
Right.
or David Thompson or Bill Walton or Charles Barkley or whatever. Right. Although some of them, it's always good to save them because some have turned out to be coaches or successful executives in the league, which
Right.
maybe they weren't star players, but you know they were maybe projected to be once upon a time. So the initial Jordan was through the mail, and his penmanship was much more neat. I can post some of these, but and I was a little worried because they were so early on. Is PSA going to even know what this is? Right? Are they going to recognize that this is a very early Jordan signature? I mean, and
Right.
there's examples of it. You'll see a North Carolina, team poster or something that he would have signed, at the time. So there are other examples out there of him. And again, his signature's kind of evolved over time as well, although pretty iconic and generally the same, style.
Yep.
But so initially getting him through the mail, but there was no ray of light from the heavens. When I got it back, it was okay. This guy could be a pretty good player for North Carolina. Again, this is pre, his fresh. The year was just getting going, right? So,
Yep.
obviously, at the end of the season, when he hit the game winner to beat Georgetown, his star started to rise. But I've told a lot of people in the hobby and from collecting, even into Jordan's first couple years in the league. I mean, it was exciting to get him to sign, and I'll get to some in-person examples in a minute. But um, I can't tell you that though it was really much different than getting Isaiah Thomas or some of the other star players of the time, right? I mean, you know, yes, he was a star. Dominique Wilkins, Isaiah. I mean, I was just as excited to get those guys, right?
Yep.
Because Jordan, it's hard to imagine now, kind of looking back at the stature that he achieved, right? But even though he was an all-star and a great player, I would say until he started winning the dunk contests and then the Bulls, got that first championship, at the time, at least from my experience, it was more of a gradual ascent to greatness, right? I mean, looking back, it's easy to say, oh, this guy is the greatest of all time, the greatest player, and everyone must have known it right away. Well, in some ways, but the first time I actually got him in person was in 1984 with the Olympic team. So kind of the last, amateur dream team, I guess you would call it, right? The team Bobby Knight coached, with
Mhm.
Jordan and, famously guys that didn't make the team, Charles Barkley and, John Stockton and a few of those guys that got cut almost became more famous in some ways than some of the guys that stayed. But that team did a tour of exhibition games getting ready for the Olympics, which were in Los Angeles. And I was living in Phoenix. So part of my success was just geography. I lived in Phoenix from 1980 to 87. And again, a much more innocent time in the hobby and kind of um, easy access to most players. So the Olympic team played an exhibition game in Phoenix, and you can go on YouTube and find it. And you can hear Billy Packer kind of drop some hints, like when Jordan starts going off in this game against NBA All Stars, right? Like Magic Johnson, Walter Davis. I forget who all was on the roster, but these were the top NBA players of the time, and Jordan was basically having his way with them. And you can hear on the broadcast Billy Packer drop some hints that, boy, haven't really seen many players ever do, things like this. So again, looking back, there's some hints that were dropped out there in the famous Bobby Knight comments that this guy might be the greatest player I've ever seen when you took a look at the whole package. But
Right.
anyhow, living in Phoenix at the time, obviously I was aware that game was coming to town. Being from Dayton, a good family friend is Don Donaher, who coached Dayton for many years and was one of Bob Knight's assistants on the '84 Olympic team. So I was in contact with Coach Donaher. He provided a ticket to the game. I knew where they were staying. He said, "Yeah, come on down to the hotel. Have you meet some of the guys. He's known me since I was a kid, right? His son is one of my lifelong closest buddies." So, and again, Jordan was one of many stars on that team, like Wayman Tisdale, Patrick Ewing, not a good signer, by the way. Sam Perkins, a lot of excellent players on that team. So I remember going to the Hyatt Regency in Phoenix, meeting up with Coach Donaher. Got there, knew the itinerary for the day when they were going to be on the bus, and so had Jordan sign a few things that day. First time in person, which was cool. And a little more rush now, but still gave you almost every letter, and the iconic autograph was really starting to take shape by then, right?
Wow.
Where the ones I got early on through the mail, it's very neat penmanship, and although you see some of the swoops of the M and the J that became more pronounced later, but and then once he got into the NBA, I'm still living in Phoenix in his first couple years in the league. Um, I'm a pretty personable guy, connect with people, pretty well, in life and business and everything else. So ended up getting to know the manager of the hotel where most of the team stayed. He'd see me there, and there was usually only 1 to 3 of us getting autographs, very, very few there. So it was not really any kind of a scene or,
Yep.
security was non-existent really. And the few of us that collected then were very respectful of the surroundings and the players and things I learned when I was a kid hanging around at the hotels in Cincinnati. And my dad would be over in the corner, with his cup of coffee, reading the paper, while my buddies and I would be, waiting for Willie Mays to get off the elevator, right? But these hotels in Cincinnati, the Netherland Hilton was like a palace, right? Which chambers and so you kind of had a unspoken understanding that you needed to conduct yourself professionally here, right? This is a privilege being here,
Mhm.
and so carried that through the rest of my collecting life, right? In terms of be respectful, kind of read the room, sort of thing. But had incredible access to players over those years in Phoenix, including Jordan in his first couple years with the Bulls. Then another fortunate circumstance was John Paxson, who signed a Sports Illustrated poster is back behind me there. I was lucky to grow up in Dayton with Jim and John Paxson. And
Mhm.
so by then, John was traded to the Bulls and became Jordan's teammate. Well, the Paxsons have known me since I was a kid, knew my collecting interest. I mean, they collected some cards like every other kid, but like didn't have the focus and passion that
Right.
that I did or a couple other buddies. And obviously they pursued the path of playing and you know got to the top of the profession doing that. But once John got on the Bulls, that was a connection as well. I mean, usually again the travel and itinerary and everything is different than it is now. They weren't on charters and things like that. So usually they'd get into town. John and I would maybe get dinner or get dinner after the game. After the game, they'd go back to the hotel. In those days, now they usually are on the bus and off to the charter and on to the next city or back to their you know, hometown. But in those days, the pace was a little slower and more
Yeah.
access. So John would help me get some things signed as well. And I kind of noticed once John was there that that Jordan was uh, you know he was starting to become that rock star that we all know now.
Right.
Although I remember one time John, uh, I was going to pick him up for dinner, and usually I would just pull up to the hotel. I mean, there weren't cell phones then either, but I, I would tell him the time, and I would just kind of pull up by where the valet part of the hotel was, and he'd come out. But this time he said, "Hey, park and come in for a minute before we go." And so I walk into the lobby, and there's John and Jordan sitting on the couch, and of the in the lobby of the hotel. It was the Hotel Westcourt, by the way, where most of
Mhm.
the teams stayed in Phoenix back in those days, which wasn't downtown. How the teams ended up staying there and why, other than there was a mall right there, and then also um, there were some restaurants right across the street. And there's sometimes you see that picture of Jordan in a go kart, I think, with Rod Higgins and Orlando Woolridge. So there was like a little fun center across from that hotel as well, where there was miniature golf and go karts and things like that. So that I was probably around that day somewhere, when that picture was taken. I mean, not literally there at that fun center, but I see that picture get posted from time to time. Anyway, I walk in the lobby. I see John on the couch. He kind of waves me over, and there's Jordan. Although Jordan has headphones on, and he said, "Hey, I just I thought you'd like to meet MJ." And so Jordan took off his headphones, shook hands, and spoke for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then we off to dinner. But really, kind of after that, access to him, other than a couple of times I'd send things to John to get signed for me, like and all the Bulls too. I mean, Pippen and he knew I was interested in all the guys, right? And I would pace myself and not overload him. I'd send a couple of things, probably twice a year. I'd send a small package of a couple of things, and that worked up until I'd say the late '80s, and then at that point, Jordan had become a rock star, and John said, I
Even
can.
John couldn't get it done then.
Even John couldn't get. It became too big of a hassle to
Yeah.
get it, and I totally respected that, and so that was kind of the end of my Jordan uh, collecting.
So you,
Although I was able to accumulate quite a few things. Some of them have sold in auctions. A couple of the cards that I consigned several years ago ended up, you know, leading to me getting into the business side of the hobby, which, so I owe a lot to Michael Jordan um, for, uh, for a couple reasons.
Right. So you were getting things signed in the mid 80s. So I imagine you had the star cards at that point, and
Sure.
86 Fleer had come out. Were you able to get those signed by him at any point? Like the big cards?
Yeah, all those. His first few Star Company cards. Now I didn't get the full run of all the Star cards. There's all those additional sets, but the main his base cards from the first two Star Company years, um, which and then there's the Rookie of the Year card,
Hmm.
um, which was kind of like a little supplemental set. I think Mark Eaton was on one of them, and Dan Issel, a couple oddball guys, and then the Olympic card. And again, that Olympic team kind of had a special place in my heart because of Coach Donaher and how well they did. And so I kind of did have a focused effort to get all those Olympic cards signed. Um,
That's
but but now through auctions and sales, I still have his base Olympic card signed, from that Olympic set, and then the second Star Company card, the one where he's
mhm.
kind of going back on defense. That's kind
Yep.
of my favorite Jordan card. I know not necessarily the most valuable, but just got a beautiful signature on it. I just like the coloring and and the um,
Yeah.
even more so than his Star Company rookie, which is a cool card, but you know
Yeah. The
I just like
colors.
the other one, the aesthetics of the other one for me. And I totally know that, a lot of this is very subjective in terms of what collectors like and what are their favorites and that kind of thing. But yes, again, kind of going back to your early question of when I was a kid, I collected what was available. And so
Mhm.
fortunately there was a card shop in Phoenix, a couple of them, but a card shop where those were available, the Star Company. And again, with the NBA teams all coming in, and um, that's what there was to get again. And I thought they were a little different, a little unusual, coming in the little bags. And this is a little different, but I liked all the information on the back, because
Yep.
I'm a sponge for just consuming any details about these players, where they're from, where they were born, when they were born, what teams they played for, all of it, right there. And so I thought they were pretty informational, and they weren't too busy, so they were pretty good to get signed, right? They're just the layout of them as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I've got hundreds and hundreds of Star Company cards signed because that's what there was.
Who knew that, at the time, especially the 86 Fleer, I mean, that signed card, I have one myself signed in ballpoint for my full 1986 Fleer autograph set. I'm going to purchase a Sharpie one soon from somebody who got him in person in 1988. I'm going to do that in October. So I'm really looking forward to that. But who knew at the time that that card, getting it signed, today that's 70 grand, 50 grand, depending on the card quality and the auto quality. It's just like, it's crazy how valuable they got, especially over the last few years or the last 5 years.
Right. Yeah. No one could have foreseen that, of course. Well, you could say that about a lot of things in the hobby, but, uh, you know, yeah, when the 86 Fleer set came out, and again, that's when I was in my autograph collecting prime in Phoenix. So, okay, Star Company's out of the picture, and now Fleer's back into the picture. So just I bought them I probably bought you know a handful of boxes of the cards. Again, I did keep one. I have one of the boxes, with Larry Bird. I've been debating on getting that signed. I know he's available to sign, so it's not in pristine shape or anything, but for some reason I kept one. But again, the reason I bought multiples was not, again, with any thought of future value, but they were so affordable. And if somehow the signature I got didn't, I liked having some backups, right? So if somehow one of them got smudged, or the Sharpie, you know, the signature wasn't up to my standards, or it was just good to have some extras. And they were so affordable. It was you know, it was easy to pick up more.
Yep.
And I
Makes
remember
sense.
it's funny when I moved to San Diego, I still had a couple of boxes of them and met this woman who was a neighbor at the time, and she was from Yugoslavia, and she was mentioning her cousin was a huge basketball fan back in Yugoslavia, and I remember giving her hundreds of 86 Fleer cards. This would have been in the late 80s. Just, oh, send these
Uh,
on. You're going to send a package. Just send, if he loves basketball, again, thinking nothing. I'm sure there were some Jordans in there.
yeah.
Um,
Now
you
the
know,
packs are. I have one. It's worth $3,000. Slabbed that 25-cent pack. It's crazy.
right.
And
I
then
don't
the
know what
box is
became.
worth.
She moved back to over there, and then there was the Civil War over that. Who knows whatever became of her or them, but I do think about that on occasion
Imagine
because
if they're
again,
in an attic somewhere over there. The box is 150 grand. It's
yeah, it,
crazy.
it was. Yeah, these would have been the wax the display boxes,
Sure.
like in the
Yeah.
stores. But yeah, I mean that's how plentiful and um, like with no awareness of these are going to be really worth something someday, kind of thing. I mean, I still have plenty of commons and
Yeah.
raw ones, but not Jordans or anything like that lying around. But
Sure.
yeah, that was kind of an interesting time. Um, and I think that kind of the 70s to the, I guess just before Bird and Magic, kind of came into the league, and I totally loved the way those guys played and what they meant to the game and all of that. But kind of I think the 70s is a little bit underappreciated. And guys like Dantley he played very well into the 80s as well. But, guys like Dantley and Bernard King and Marcus Johnson and
Pistol Pete. He's another
Pistol
big one.
Pete, David Thompson, Dave Cowens, just my buddies and I kind of, we kind of wondered why isn't everybody into this, right? This is great, and I know the league had some issues and they've been well documented, but as far as we were concerned, it was
Yeah.
great. And for us, the closest place in the 70s, once the Cincinnati Royals moved to Kansas City, was to go to Indianapolis. And a lot of times you'll see pictures posted of Pacers games with, George McGinnis or people like that. And you see whole sections of empty seats, right? Even though basketball was huge in Indiana and Indianapolis, it was pretty easy ticket, anytime we'd go. Right. And,
Different
and
time.
I was away at college at times, but we would kind of map it out and, the Jazz are going to be playing with Pistol Pete, we've got to go, right? It's over Christmas break and we'll be home. And so my buddies and I would go, or the Knicks are coming in with Earl Monroe, Spencer Haywood, Bob McAdoo, we were all over it, but not many others were.
Right. So, Tim, before I fast forward a bit to the LeBron era, because I want to hear about how you got LeBron's autograph, just given
Yes.
that he was a star from a very young age, and there probably was never an easy time to get his autograph. Before I do that, one very quick question for you. How many things off the top of your head do you think you've gotten signed in your life through the mail and in person in total? Give or take a few thousand.
Yeah. I had the calculation of a conservative number that was, like 20 to 25,000. Where if you kind of break it down by, well, if I got this many per year for this many years, right? And let's say for 50 years, I got 500 items a year.
Right.
That's a very possible number. Considering my brother and I, again, things have changed a little bit, but back in our heavy Final Four or NBA Summer League, 3 or 4 days, we'd get 100, or Chicago pre-draft camp when that was more accessible. We'd get 200-300 things signed just over the course of a couple of days, a piece. So,
Amazing.
considering that we're pretty relentless through the mail and going to other games and things like that, that's probably a safe
25,000.
number.
That's impressive.
Yeah, although it was never I'm going to try to get to this many, or it was just an ongoing effort, right? A lot of the fun is in the pursuit and the chase of it as well. I still kind of you know, don't get a lot of joy into buying things, but if it's to kind of, fill a gap, or that's the only way you can get a player, or they've passed away, or you know, certainly for me, the fun is having that in-person encounter, having something in my folder that I've carried around of some NBA scout that's a former player that, I know one of these days, he's going to be, in a place where I am, and boom, there he is, and I've got it. And
Awesome.
one of my friends who I got to know during the Phoenix years, he was a big fan, but not a collector, but he was, a guy that enjoyed going along for the ride. So we'd go to NCAA tournaments. We did a few things where we do like the 12 games in 4 days. Like one year, Charlotte and Winston-Salem both were hosting regionals. So, it was 4 games Thursday, 4 games Friday, 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday. And, and it was doable just due to logistics. But then, part of it was getting the team autographs, who's there scouting, who's broadcasting the games. We were very detailed in terms of all the possibilities. So we'd see somebody scouting, through the binoculars across the arena, right? And my buddy Andy, who's since has passed away, but he called it the triple whammy, which was, that I was prepared enough to have something of this guy in my folder. B, I was able to recognize them, among a crowd, in their street clothes. And then C, that I was able to produce it on kind of a moment's notice and make the encounter happen. Right. And, he witnessed that many times to the point where he called it the triple Rammy, right? We're watching a game in Charlotte, and, oh yeah, there's, that's Phil Hubbard over there. I think he scouts for the Cavs now, or Detroit, I think. But, oh yeah, I've got that Phil Hubbard card in my folder because I knew he was a scout. And then I'd race off at halftime or in between games, get it signed, and come back, and he'd just be shaking his head. Right? He saw that happen many, many times.
That's wild. That's wild. All right, Tim. So how did you get LeBron? How did you get like probably one of the more impossible people to sign things? How did you get him to sign stuff?
Right. So there's a good story here. So I mentioned going to those Pacers games, for example. And one of my buddies that was along for the ride for a lot of those, also a big fan and enjoyed being along for the ride, so to speak, but not a collector really, just enjoyed seeing it all happen, having the interaction with the players, even though he wasn't a collector, he appreciated the experience aspect of it. So, and that friend is a guy named Kim Otten, who's a good friend to this day, and has lived for many years in Cleveland, Ohio. A little clue there. So, again, known me since I was a kid, knows what I'm interested in. So when LeBron first came on the scene, and of course, being from Ohio, I kind of had an early awareness of him, because of that, just tracking Ohio high school basketball and that type of thing. Well, there started to be some things about LeBron in Slam magazine, Student Sports. He was on the cover of that. Not the Sports Illustrated cover yet, which is a key tipping point in all of this. So there were some photos of him in Slam, not a cover, but a feature about him pretty early on. Also in Student Sports, which I looked at the Student Sports picture that I have signed, and the article was written by Brian Windhorst, who obviously we all see and hear him all the time now. Yep. On ESPN and podcasts and covering the league. And probably not a coincidence that he was with LeBron from the beginning, and someone that kind of had access early on and was able to leverage that to quite a career. So anyway, I'm in touch with my friend Kim. I said, hey, I'm sure you know about this guy LeBron. And again, we'd gone to high school all-star games and things in Ohio growing up, and following all the, we both played for our high school teams as well. And, we're, again, no detail too minor for us in terms of following the game and being interested. So I said, I'm sure you're aware of this guy LeBron, back in your area, you planning to go see him play anytime soon? He said, yeah, we're going to, I've been meaning to do that. And I said, well, can I send you some stuff to get signed? You know my deal, Kim. Kim is my buddy, and he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, go send it. I'll see what I can do." And so he and his wife, they didn't have kids yet. This was kind of early on in their marriage. They went to a game. I've asked them to look for the ticket, although for a weekday high school game before LeBron really blew up, you know, it might have been just like a ticket you'd get at the fair, right? Like
Yeah.
nothing that's even uh, you know aesthetically interesting, if there even was anything. So there is no ticket, but he went to an early on game. He remembers it was a weeknight, um, and they saw LeBron play. Obviously, an impressive guy. I probably had 5 or 6 pictures and 2 index cards that I'd sent him. Magazine pictures, just tear out
Yep.
from Slam magazine. Most of the ones from Slam were black and white photos. The student sports was a color photo. I've posted them over over the years. I think a time or two. So anyway, Kim and his wife wait after the game. He said, again, telling me later, uh, you know, no entourage, no handlers, not heavily attended game. And so they approached him afterwards, and he was nice. And Kim, in fact, Kim said his wife, Marilyn, said, "Boy, isn't it something for someone so young to have their picture in magazines already?" And he kind of laughed about it. So
Wow.
got them signed. It's a smaller signature, and with the jersey number, LeBron James 23, but kind of a smaller. And so um, I sent him a stamp return envelope. Sometime later, the pictures all came back. Great, nice to add him to the collection. But at that point, is he going to turn out to be an all-time great, or is one of those guys that you know was a good high school prospect, but for whatever reason didn't achieve what we all hoped? Right? No forward thinking other than thank goodness Slam and some other you know publications had a few things of him to even get. Um, and so not long after that, the Sports Illustrated issue, the Chosen One, came out. And that kind of changed everything, right? So, especially then, once someone was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, that was significant, right?
Right.
And as you probably know, there's a whole world of Sports Illustrated collectors, and getting Sports Illustrated covers signed by everybody, by whoever's on Sports Illustrated.
Yep.
Um, and and so his accessibility and signing habits really changed after that. In fact, later that same season, they came out and played. I may not be. There's probably some LeBron historians that may have me off on my timing a bit, but either later that season or the next season, Akron St. Vincent St. Mary came out here and played at UCLA against Mater Dei, the powerhouse Orange County Mater Dei. And I'd gone to some of the big high school events like that out in LA over the years, always able to get, Dwight Howard, Sebastian Telfair, whoever the star players were, accessible, able to get them. It maybe took a little work, but always able to get the job done, right? Mission accomplished. Well,
Yep.
LeBron, again, having been on SI, he was a rock star already. Remember, it took a long while for Jordan, in my view, with LeBron. After that Sports Illustrated, it seemed everything had changed.
Well,
So,
yeah.
even then, I thought, well, I was lucky to, and there was no strategy of let's get these signed before he gets. I had no idea he was even going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated yet, right? Just was lucky that I sent him when I did, and got him done when I did. So,
Right.
um, so yeah, those are the LeBrons. So I've got an index card and I think 3 or 4 photos. One more is over at PSA now. As I've slowly been going through things and trying to get all my Jordans, all my Maraviches, all my LeBrons. Guys like all my Chamberlains. Kind of getting all those slabbed, just
Yeah. Of course.
just to preserve them, but also obviously if there comes a point where it's time to sell them, obviously they're ready to go now.
Yeah.
So, and
It's
so far everything's passed. So, which thankfully, and I have a good story behind it, but I know they don't always take any of that into account.
No, you never know what you're going to get. You know what stands out for me the most, Tim, is that you have kind of been there through all of basketball history. You've been there in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and then in the LeBron era. And because you were there consistently, you've been just able to get the autographs of the stars, and I'm sure quite a few, probably even more non-stars. And it's just a testament to your consistency and dedication that you've built a collection this large. It's just amazing. I feel like I've just gotten a course in basketball history. It's wild.
Well, it's something that is easy for me to retain. It's effortless to, to observe and remember a lot of this just because it was so significant and enjoyable to me.
Sure, sure.
Talking about stories before, I had a couple other quick ones I wanted to give you, and obviously, I know of your interest in the Boston teams and
Of
Larry
course,
Bird.
of course.
Um, and this has been documented in some of the stories written about me, but I have a great Larry Bird story. I,
Oh,
I
let's hear
touched
it.
a little bit on and Larry, is not a real easy guy to approach. Let's just put it that way. I've done that on occasion, and you kind of get the steely-eyed look that if you're no words spoken, but the look of if you're approaching me, this better be worth it. Kind of that's the unspoken look and vibe I've gotten from him, several times, and sometimes it's been a successful encounter. Other times it's not, or he's taken what I've given him and almost kind of defaced it with how he signed it. And so I've had a wide range of experiences with Larry, and that's why to me it's almost I don't know how to digest that he's doing these signings, all the time, and it's it takes a little of the fun out of the history of this being difficult
Right. And
to
I've
me
heard
in some
through.
ways. But I'm not. I'm glad more collectors can enjoy getting a signature on things. So that's the overriding part of it. But going back to those days of the Pacers games, and again, you could after the game would end, you could go wait by the locker room, and there would be a door and maybe one security guard, just basically not doing much, just making sure you didn't, no one, went into the locker room that wasn't supposed to, right? There was no, kid get away or, what are you doing here? So I'm waiting after the game for autographs. And, obviously sometimes it's, 30, 40 minutes or so before guys start trickling out, depending on the situation. And so you kind of make eye contact with this older security guard, hey, young man, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just going to get some of the guys' autographs, got my folder here and hoping to get some cards and pictures signed. And he's like, well, if you're getting autographs, you should get that blonde headed boy leaning against the wall over there. And I said, oh, who's that? Who's he? And he said, well, his name's Larry Bird. And I said, well, I don't know who that is. What's his story? And he said, well, he's going to play for Indiana State next year. He was a good high school player from around these parts. And, so it was basically during the year Larry was out, the legendary story where he lasted just such a short time at Indiana, went back to French Lick, worked on, the work on the garbage truck, which is, he worked for the city. So I think he did a number of jobs, but, the urban legend is, he probably did work some on a garbage truck among other jobs working for the city. But I think this was in that window of time that, in between. So I went over and had him sign an index card. So a good reason to have index cards, right? Because, you just never know who you might run into that you want to have sign. So I had him sign it, and an index card. Again, his signature has also changed some over the years, but that was a very early on signature. And I was kind of curious why he was, who he was waiting for or what was going on. And so as I'm getting things signed, there was a player named Steve Green that played at Indiana. He graduated in '75, so he was a year just ahead of the '76 undefeated team with Buckner and Scott May and Kent Benson and Wilkerson, Laskowski, all those guys. But a very good player and played in the NBA and ABA. So he was playing on the Pacers at the time, and was kind of a journeyman forward for the Pacers, but an Indiana guy as well. So he came out of the locker room, and Bird went over and they talked. I'm just kind of observing this from a few feet away, and Steve Green hands Bird his shoes, his basketball shoes, which again, no one would have been collecting shoes at the time, so it wasn't as a collectible. So, as I've thought about that now, as the years have gone by, he probably knew him from, Indiana connections, maybe even Indiana University. They're both bigger guys, so maybe they wore the same size shoes. And, Larry wasn't a pro making millions of dollars for a while yet. That was probably a distant dream. So they had their little exchange, and he gave Bird his shoes. So that was another chapter in the book, I guess, of just my collecting experience. And again, a thank you to that security guard at Market Square Arena that tipped me off. So still didn't really know who Larry Bird was. And then the next college season,
Then you did. Yeah.
you started hearing about this guy at Indiana State, putting up 35, 40. I'm like, well, that's the guy I saw after that Pacers game. So
right, the security guard called him the blonde guy.
I remember he had his, kind of little Indiana dialect. That blonde-headed boy leaning against the wall over there. I remember it like it was yesterday. How he said it and what he said.
Awesome.
And of course, Larry was. I don't remember the encounter, that vividly, but he certainly wouldn't have been engaging. He complied and signed my index card, but I think it was more of a look like, why would you want my autograph kind of thing, but he did it.
Yeah. Excellent.
So that's kind of a fun Bird story. And
I love it.
And it was a definite relief when he started becoming so successful that I already had his autograph. I mean, not knowing that he would be pretty tough to get, once he got into the NBA with the Celtics.
Right. You were all set. You already had the autographs. You were good.
At least I had him on something. Yeah,
exactly. So Tim, I got one final question. We ask everybody this question. If you could sit down and get a coffee with any sports figure, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Yeah. I heard you ask Adrian Dantley that, and the name that popped into my head, just unfiltered, was Al McGuire. So the former Marquette coach. I think most of the younger listeners would know of him as in his broadcasting career. But, a very eccentric, I kind of have as big influences on my life, Coach John Wooden, who, very structured pyramid of success. Most people know about, Coach Wooden and how he went about things, Midwestern guy from Indiana, came out to UCLA and built the dynasty. And then there's Al McGuire. He won the 1977 NCAA title at Marquette, but, a New York City guy, kind of a seat of the pants, go by intuition, gut instinct, type of a guy, and there's all kinds of great information about Al McGuire and how he, went about things. And, but, I was able to meet Al a few times, saw him speak at a corporate event after he'd retired from coaching, but was still broadcasting. But some buddies of mine had him come speak at a sales conference up in Orange County. This is like 35 years ago, but knew I was a big basketball fan and, made sure I got in the ballroom. And so just seeing Al speak to that group with no notes, a whole ballroom full of people, no notes, no slides, just, yet he had, people, hanging on his every word, and just, genuine. So Al McGuire, and I invite any of your viewers and listeners that to do some research on Coach Al. He's a pretty fascinating guy. And, just as Coach Wooden on the structured side, Coach Al is more kind of trust your gut, trust your instinct. Don't, one of his things he'd say was, don't over prepare in life, right? Or you're not a good coach unless you can, scrap your game plan 2 minutes into the game when you see it's not working, right? And just, he kind of had a whole nother look at things. And
Mhm.
Dick
Great.
Enberg, most people will know, the legendary broadcaster. He was one of Al's broadcast partners for many years. Wrote a one-man play, a one-man show called McGuire, where there's an actor, that kind of captured the essence of Al, kind of like you know someone would play Mark Twain or Abraham Lincoln, or a one-man show kind of thing. Well, this guy portrayed Al McGuire. And being in San Diego, Dick Enberg lived in La Jolla his last years of his life, and so that play was uh, presented here number of times. So that was another thing that kind of fueled my Al McGuire interest. My name that popped to my head was Al McGuire.
Excellent. I like it. I did not know who he was until you just mentioned him now, believe it or not. So I feel like I need to do some research now and start digging around. Very cool.
Yeah, he's one of my life heroes. Well, he actually played for the Knicks, so he
Mhm.
played at St. John's. His brother Dick McGuire is a Hall of Famer, um, but Al also played at St. John's like his brother, and then um, played for the Knicks briefly, and then got into coaching. He wasn't a heavily skilled player, but good enough to make the league back in the pioneer days.
Sure.
Briefly with the Knicks, then got into coaching, and kind of took Marquette to heights where they'd never been before. I mean, you would know some of the names, Maurice Lucas, Jim Jones, Dean the Dream Meminger,
Yep.
George Thompson. So he really built that Marquette program, had a pipeline of a lot of New York City players, and yeah, just a fascinating uh, character in life as well as basketball.
Great. Well, Tim, thank you very much for coming on. As I promised the audience, I think we just spoke with the goat of autographs for sure. Not just that, but I
Uh,
feel like I just walked through 4 or 5 decades of basketball history. I mean, I almost have to go back and listen to some of these names, and they're just long forgotten, right? So it's been a pleasure having you on and talking about these different eras and getting autographs in these eras. So thank you for joining.
Sure. Well, it's great to talk to other collectors and kind of share the joy I've had from all these years of collecting. And the other, I guess, the closing comment. After a long corporate life, I finally was able to merge my passion with cards and collecting and autographs with my occupation. So I work for Robert Edward Auctions as a consignment director, and I've been in this business now for a few years. A couple consignments I had some years ago. Thank you, Michael Jordan and Pistol Pete and Wilt Chamberlain and Kobe. Uh, Stuff I collected very innocently and without thought of future value. Way back when. Turned out to get me exposed in a good way to the industry and the hobby. And so if anybody wants to reach out about collecting, they are interested in buying things through our auction, interested in consigning things through our auction, would be happy to talk with them. So you can find me pretty easily through the Robert Edward Auctions website. Um, Email Tim at robertedwardauctions.com. So I'm out there, and I do a post every day on Twitter and Facebook from my collection. So a little sampling each day of basketball collecting memorabilia that
I look
hopefully
forward to
everyone can
those.
enjoy.
Those posts are actually great because every day I sort of see them like, oh wow, that is such a cool autograph or such a cool photo. So definitely check them out, everybody.
Yeah,
Great.
actually, the one I posted today, Phil Sellers, he just passed away, age 69. But it kind of was touching to me because I was sort of a pen pal with him. I wrote to him his freshman year at Rutgers, and he wrote back and sent me a media guide, and then we started corresponding. And one of the things he wrote back on an index card later on was a note to my dad. It said, to Tim's dad, I think you have a fine boy. Take good care of him, Phil Sellers. So when Phil just passed away the other day, it kind of took me back to that. And and my dad passed away a couple of years ago as well, but it was kind of a cool memory of Phil acknowledging my dad. So
That's pretty special.
yeah, so that was kind of a fun one uh, to pull out of the archives and display this very day. But
Great.
hey, thanks for indulging me on all the stories. It's always fun to talk about all this, and look forward to continuing to watch and listen to your podcasts.
Thank you, Tim. And you heard him, audience. If you want to reach out, consign something, or probably just talk basketball, I would hit him up. He knows a lot, and he's been through every era of it. So thanks again, Tim. This has been another episode of Sports Card Madness.